The Photograph That Shouldn't Exist, 1895. October 12, 1895, I first heard the story of the photograph on a day as gray and silent as the image itself. The air in London was cool, a damp London fog clinging to the cobblestones like smoke from a dying fire. The year was pivotal. Only months earlier, on January 7, 1895, Wilhelm Röntgen had announced the discovery of X-rays, the invisible rays that passed through flesh and wood and made the unseen visible. Science was alive with wonder, and in the darkest corners of museums, curious minds hunted for riddles the new light could not explain. Roar Media Archive. I was summoned to the Royal Society by an urgent telegram from Professor Oliver Hawthorne, an antiquarian known for his unusual interests, cryptic manuscripts, lost civilizations, and now, apparently, the unexplained. The telegram read simply, "Bring lantern and notes. Photograph enclosed is to remain secret. Come at dusk. O. Hawthorne." I arrived at exactly 5:03 p.m. Dusk in London then was a shifting gray, not night, not dawn. In the hall outside Hawthorne's study hung heavy tapestries, muffling sound so that the ticking of a grandfather clock seemed deafening. When he invited me inside, he barely glanced toward the fireplace. His eyes were fixed on a small glass frame resting on a green felt desk. The frame was unusual, like cases for cartes de visite from the 1860s, but its edges were more refined, its glass thinner, like the casing of a microscope slide. "It came in the post," Hawthorne said, voice low. "Postmarked Glasgow, September 28, 1895. No sender." He lifted the frame and set it on the desk. The photograph inside was sepia-toned, captured on thick cardstock, the newly popular cabinet card style. It bore a date in bold handwritten ink at the bottom, taken at Black Hollow Quarry, August 3, 1895. The printed studio name on the back read, J.T. Merriweather, photographer, Cheltenham Road, Bristol. I examined the handwriting of the date and location, elegant, sharp, and unquestionably 18th century script. Something about the card felt wrong, not just eerie in content, but in material. I studied the surface under a magnifying lens. No cracks, no emulsion lifting, no physical signs of age beyond subtle yellowing that could be faked if one had the patience. Yet the photograph itself, what it showed, was impossible. The image depicted 4 figures standing in the mouth of a limestone quarry. 3 men dressed in typical 1895 field attire, high boots, thick woolen trousers, suspenders, and canvas jackets. Their expressions were stern, faces hardened from sun and wind. Behind them, a cliff of chalky stone rose. Nothing extraordinary there. But there, in the shadows between 2 boulders, was a 5th figure, a woman in Victorian dress, not odd in itself, except she wore no hat, had long hair down to her waist, and, most unsettling, she looked directly into the camera with eyes that refused to be explained. Her attire was anachronistic, not Victorian at all, but something closer to medieval peasant garb. A linen shift, a rough woolen cloak gathered at the chest with a simple brooch forged in a style that had vanished from England centuries earlier. I lifted the card, careful not to disturb its delicate surface, and turned it to the back, looking for clues. The reverse bore no studio stamp, no annotations beyond the printed name, but etched into the cardstock itself, faintly but undeniably there, were a grid of tiny numbers, 19036578 46029. It looked like a cipher or some form of early catalog number. I showed it to Hawthorne. "I have never seen anything like this," he said, his voice constrained, "and I have handled thousands of cartes de visites and cabinet cards." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a leather folio stamped with the Royal Society seal. Inside were photographic plates, letters and diaries, pseudo-archival materials he'd collected on anomalies like this. He turned to a page dated August 18th, 1895. A yellow diary entry in ink, shaky with age. August 18, 1895. Reverend Thomas Greeley sent a curious photograph from Black Hollow Quarry. Claims it shows a woman unknown to anyone in the parish. Refused to release original negative. States she appeared behind the men after the shutter was released. Beside the written text was a crude sketch, two men with surveying equipment, and behind them a tall figure with cloak and striking eyes. The sketcher had noted, "She does not cast shadow." I felt a chill. The diary entry concluded, "Negative to remain sealed. Reverend's name carved into back of station wagon, no return address." Hawthorne looked up. "It seems no one wanted this image published, yet here it is." We stared at the photograph in silence. I asked him to describe where Black Hollow Quarry was. He fetched a map dated 1890. Black Hollow lay near the border of Somerset and Devon, a place where travelers reported strange lights at night and whispers carried on wind, said to be echoes of centuries past. No official geological survey existed beyond a preliminary note in 1874. When I ran my finger along the map, the quarry seemed almost too remote, a place forgotten by time. I held the card closer to the gaslight flickering on the desk. That was when I saw something new. Embedded in the cliff's texture behind the figures, barely visible, was a shape, like an archaic carving, a pattern of spirals and lines that resembled symbols from pre-Roman Britain. I asked Hawthorne for a glass plate negative. He frowned. "There are none," he said. "All we have is this. The original was surrendered years ago, sealed and locked in the Society archives, along with the Reverend's letters." He reached into another drawer. With gloved hands, he lifted a glass envelope, crackling softly. Inside was a negative, a different photograph, or so I assumed, until he laid it beside the card. It was a duplicate of the image before us, yet darker, the quarry shadows deeper, the features more pronounced. But in this negative, the figure of the woman was sharper, more detailed. Her eyes seemed to glow, not reflective of light, but as if they held a secret fire. "No one has seen this for decades," Hawthorne whispered. "Only the negative is here. The original paper print was lost after the Reverend's disappearance." He placed the negative under the lamp. I saw something in it that stirred a memory, a passage from Fermat's writings on optics, where he argued that the human eye could misinterpret images beyond certain wavelengths. Fiction a century from now? Perhaps, but as I stared into the negative, it felt alive. I asked to borrow the negative for scientific analysis. Hawthorne hesitated, then acquiesced. I left the Royal Society with the glass carefully wrapped, a lantern, and a heart thrumming with uneasy curiosity. That night I took the negative to my laboratory. My workspace was modest, an oak desk, shelves of chemistry books, and old European maps. I laid the glass under a raking beam of candlelight. I placed a magnifying lens over the woman's face. The lines of her eyes, her cheekbones, the peculiar tilt of her head. There was something unearthly about her gaze. It seemed to follow me as I moved around the table, as if the image wasn't just a representation, but a presence trapped in emulsion. I compared the clothing styles. The men wore garments typical of 1895 field workers, sturdy and practical. Their stitching matched what I'd seen in documented British field attire from the decade. The woman's dress, however, was inconsistent with any fashion from Victorian catalogues. There were no references to such garments in any textile compendium from the 18th or 19th century. Her cloak's weave was coarse, dyed with a pigment that resembled plant-based dyes no longer commonly used after the introduction of aniline dyes in 1856. I examined the geological formation in the background. Black Hollow Quarry was limestone, consistent with the area, but embedded near the base of the cliff was that ancient design I'd noticed earlier, a spiral motif so distinct it defied coincidence, almost like prehistoric carvings found in Celtic sites throughout Britain, thousands of years old. August 3, 1895, a date now stamped in my mind. I catalogued notes in my journal. 1. Photograph appears to show a temporal anomaly, a figure out of time. 2. Clothing inconsistent with historical period. 3. Carvings behind the figures resemble prehistoric symbolism predating Celtic era. 4. Negative and print differ, figure more vivid in negative. 5. Reverend Greeley disappeared shortly after sending this to a contact. I sat in silence. Then I noticed a detail previously missed. The 3 men in the photo, their faces not only turned toward the camera, but their eyes were closed. What moment of photography could yield such a thing? In 1895, long exposures were routine. If eyes were open, they often blurred. But closed eyes across all 3 subjects suggested intention, perhaps forced by a bright flash? Yet flash powder was not standard in 1895 outdoor photography. It was risky and unpredictable. I pored over textbooks. On June 2, 1895, a publication in the Photographic Journal of Great Britain described experimental flash photography techniques using magnesium powder and mirrors to reflect ambient light. Some pioneers were experimenting with flash outdoors. The article warned, such experimentation should be approached with caution. Overexposure can result in distortion or even ocular discomfort to subjects. That line, ocular discomfort, it stung. Could a flash have been used? And if so, what could cause the subjects to close their eyes? Was it possible the woman emitted some form of light that forced their reflexive blink? I did not want to consider it, but the image was bending reason. I decided to consult Dr. Beatrice Langdon, an expert on Victorian spiritual societies and occult interest in photography. She had published essays on early spirit photography, attempts to capture the supernatural using the camera's chemistry. Some in the 1890s believed that the plate could act as a medium to photograph ghosts. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle himself wrote on such matters, notably the Cottingley Fairies photographs in 1917, though that came later and was later revealed as a hoax. Langdon welcomed me into her cluttered study, walls lined with books, papers, and dozens of 19th-century photographs. She handled the glass negative with reverent caution. "Look," I said, pointing to the figure. Her breath caught. "The eyes," she whispered. "Human eyes should not appear luminous in a negative." "I know," I admitted, "and yet—" She adjusted her glasses. "This, if authentic, predates much of spirit photography, and yet I have seen references in spiritualist journals of the 1890s to a place called Black Hollow, described as a site where the veil between worlds thinned." I frowned. "Between worlds?" "Yes," she said, "not metaphorically. Some believed, and some still do, that certain sites in Britain carry a resonance, places where ancient rites occurred, where grief or memory lingers like a stain. I shivered. Langdon produced a folded letter from her desk. To whom concerned, the enclosed photograph was taken at Black Hollow Quarry by my brother, Richard Ainsworth, August 3, 1895. My brother reported an encounter, not merely with figures of flesh, but with something beyond explanation. I have the original negative and will forward when safe to do so. Mary Ann Ainsworth, October 14, 1895. There was no seal, the letter was brittle. "But the dates match," I murmured. "August 3rd, the same as the card." And she wrote 2 months later, yet no record exists of what happened afterward. I thought of Reverend Greeley's disappearance. Langdon sat back. Photography was new enough that many believed the camera could reveal hidden truths, spirits, echoes of memory, ancient presences. They were wrong in most cases. "But what if this isn't like most cases?" I whispered. She held my gaze. "Then we must acknowledge a mystery that defies our understanding of time, history, and physics." We examined the photograph for hours, comparing minutiae, shadows, angles, expressions, the position of tools. The woman's feet were not aligned with the ground plane. She seemed to float just slightly above the chalky soil, as though the standards of perspective skewed around her. On a scrap of paper, Langdon scribbled, "Temporal displacement? Psychophysical anomaly? Or simply photographic artifact copied over generations?" I turned the phrase over in my mind. Time, after all, was not immutable. In November 1895, just 3 months after that photograph was taken, physicists were debating the nature of light, energy, and the unseen forces that governed reality. It was a year rich with discoveries and questions, but none explained this image. In the weeks that followed, I traveled to Black Hollow Quarry. I arrived by train in early December, the day gray like an old print, wind sifting through skeletal branches of winter trees. A local station master pointed me toward a narrow dirt path that led into dense brush. On an old map I carried, the quarry was marked but not named. To locals, it was simply the Hollow. At the quarry's edge, stones jutted like broken teeth. I unpacked the glass negative, my breath freezing in the air. I set up a small folding camera of my own, intending to take a photograph of the place where that impossible image was made. As I adjusted the lens toward the shadowed entrance between boulders, the air shifted. A hush settled, unlike any silence I'd known. The stone face behind me seemed to breathe, subtle but perceptible. I snapped the shutter. The shutter clicked. I waited. Nothing stirred. Yet in that moment I wondered if I had just captured another truth, one that might reveal what the original photograph had shown. When I developed the slide later that night by lamplight in my hotel room, I saw only the quarry, stark, silent, and unpopulated. No figures, no shade where a woman might have stood. But on the edge of the frame, faintly etched like a fingerprint, was a shape, too blurry to make out, yet undeniably there. A form that seemed to merge with shadow and stone, as though the quarry itself remembered something that shouldn't be visible. I stared at that image in silence for a long while. Then I noticed something else, a set of numbers etched in the margin of the developed slide. -1 1895/0803 46-029-X. Those same strange figures, like the cryptic digits on the original card's back, recurred here. I traced them with a finger. What did they mean? Were they a catalog, a warning, coordinates, or something else entirely? I could not decipher them. Now, in January 1896, the mystery persists. Scholars debate whether the Black Hollow Quarry photograph was a hoax, a spiritual artifact, a trick of light, or something beyond classification. Letters in obscure journals speak of sightings in the quarry, voices heard at dusk, lights seen on moonless nights. None of these accounts are verified. The original cabinet card remains locked in a sealed archive. The Reverend Greeley's fate is undocumented. The Ainsworth negative vanished shortly after Langdon acquired her copy, its last known location unconfirmed. The strange numbers remain a cipher that defies logic. Light bends around shadow. Time folds into memory. This photograph, taken on August 3, 1895, persists as a riddle at the crossroads of history and the unknowable. What walked out of Black Hollow that day? What was captured by that shutter? And why does the image refuse to reveal its secret? I do not have the answer, and perhaps there is no answer to be found. Yet the photograph exists, and it shouldn't.